You're listening to the Equip Podcast, a ministry of Austin Ridge Bible Church. To learn more about upcoming Equip classes and events, visit www.austinridge.org/equip. Welcome back to another roundtable discussion. In our episode today, Joey, Jeff, and Lorri are joined by speaker, writer, and Austin Ridge partner Larry O'Donnell as they discuss being a Christ follower in the workplace. Since retiring from his career in business, Larry now spends his time sharing about successful leadership that he's learned throughout his career, and he brings a lot of experience and wisdom to the table today. Enjoy.
Larry O'Donnell, thanks for being here today and at the round table. So, tell a bit about waste management, and also just you were on a TV show. So tell us a little about that.
Yes, indeed. I was on a TV show, first Boss on Undercover Boss.
Season 1, episode 1, right?
Oh, is that right?
After the Super Bowl. It was quite the experience. And
did you get to wear a wig and some funny
No, because I was the first one. They didn't do any of that.
Because it wasn't a concept that people would have been familiar with.
They didn't
at that
even
point.
really know quite how it was going to come together. So... I did grow my beard out, and back then I wore contacts, so I wore my glasses like I do now all the time.
You say back then, when was that, like 2000?
It was filmed in 2009 and aired after the Super Bowl in 2010.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, and then, I couldn't say anything about it for the whole year. It was filmed about this time of year in 2009, so I had to go about a year.
Wow.
Right.
Because they said they were going to use ours to try to bring other companies.
Right.
They wanted to film the whole season first.
Yeah, sure. Wow. And so your role at the time, did you say that your role at the time was?
Yeah, I was president of Waste Management.
Okay.
And it was a fun experience.
Yeah.
Although it was scary going through it because we knew we had no editing rights. In fact, when they first brought it to me, I didn't want to do it. I don't watch television that much, but the little bit I do, I see advertisements for reality TV, and it's like most of the ones that I've seen, it sort of seems like it's people who want to bring attention to all their flaws, and I just as soon keep mine to myself. So it wasn't really something I wanted to do, and I'm not about trying to, shine the light on myself. And as they explained that it was more about the employees and the great stories about the frontline employees, I thought that'd be a good thing.
Yeah.
And I knew we had great stories. One of the reasons they wanted me to do the very first one is they had learned that I actually was already doing that at work. I wasn't going undercover, but I'd go meet with our employees like at 3 a.m. and give a safety briefing, and then pick out one of the drivers and go work for him or her.
That's cool.
All day.
That's awesome.
So they wanted somebody that was comfortable in those roles.
So were you actually, overall pretty happy with the end product?
Yeah, the way it turned out.
Yeah.
Now, of course, they made the management team look like very aloof and not aware of what's going on. But that was the whole premise of the show, and so that was
embellished that a little bit.
Yeah.
That's why Larry is a good boss, because he, number one, wanted to be in the lives of his employees, and number two, understood that the editors have all the power.
Yeah, they have all
that is some wisdom right there.
I learned that they can do just about anything.
Yeah.
There were no scripts or do-overs. They just filmed us as I worked with each of the employees. But the setting that they have there, where I'm talking to our management team, if they put a camera on you long enough, they can get a reaction out of you and then put all that together. They look like they were pretty aloof and out of touch, and they're really not. They're continue to be a great team over there.
Cool. Well, that's really cool. So we have Larry here today. We're in this season of being a Christ follower in 2020, and we want to talk about being a Christ follower in the workplace. And we thought bringing him on would be really, really helpful. And I thought a great place for us to start in the spirit of the workplace is do a little icebreaker. We haven't done one this season yet, but what was our first job, and tell us a little bit about that first job, and then briefly just kind of your career path as it goes. So we'll start with you, since we ended with your, I don't know if it was the end of your career path, but what was the beginning of your career path?
Well, I actually grew up in a family, a construction family, so I grew up in construction. My first job was in second grade, working at our lumber yard, stocking shelves and sweeping floors.
Nice.
And I grew up through that. every year, my dad put me in a different role. So I was a framing carpenter, a plumber, electrician, till I eventually a heavy equipment operator, and got to where I was actually running crews, building houses, all the way through college. And so then I practiced law for 10 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Then most of my career was spent in the oil field. So I spent, my career is about spans of 10 years. Spent 10 years practicing law, mergers, acquisitions, buying and selling companies, business type law. Then I spent 10 years at Baker Hughes. I decided, I realized that I really enjoyed business a lot more than practicing law. So I moved over to Baker Hughes, which is the third largest oil and gas service company in the world. Worked there for almost 10 years, primarily doing work, international type work. Then I got recruited to Waste Management. It was the largest blow up in history at the time. So when you think of companies like Enron or WorldCom, Waste Management was the largest at the time. Wow. Those came later. And so I got recruited to go over and help turn that company around. Spent about 10 and a half years there and did get it turned around, and continues to do great. Yeah. And then I left there after 10 and a half years and went and decided to try a startup. I'd never done that. Spent most of my career in Fortune 200 companies. So started a company, oil service company from scratch. I was employee number one. We grew that to what is now a public company.
Oh, wow.
So that was a very fun experience as well.
Yeah, it's cool.
What are you, like 120 years old?
I was thinking all the years here.
I love the decades.
Well, I will
You
say,
look good for 120.
when I started at Waste Management, I had thick hair like Joey. It looked like this after about the first year. It was a mess there.
Wow,
but
That's really funny.
What a
was
fantastic
fun.
ride you've been on.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
God has really used me in so many ways, and it's been fun to now be able to use what he put me through now in ministry. I spend probably about 90% of my time in ministry.
That's
now.
awesome. We'll have some more questions about that in a little bit. How about you guys?
Well, it's funny because my grandparents owned a lumberyard in a small town in Oklahoma. So this was not my first job, but when we would get in trouble at my grandparents, there were a bunch of cousins. And so someone was inevitably doing something that they shouldn't. And when we would get in trouble, our punishment would be my grandpa would give us all magnets and he would tie a string to them. And we had to go around the lumberyard picking up nails with magnets. So that wasn't my first job, but it was one of my first memories of walking around doing that.
Nice.
My first job actually in high school was coaching gymnastics.
Okay.
I was a gymnast growing up, and they actually would let us teach some of the little preschool classes. And so that was my first paid job where I think I kind of figured out that I like teaching. And so that was my official career path. I taught high school for 15 years. And, as I was thinking about it, when you're a teacher, you have a bunch of employees and a bunch of bosses all at the same time. So that was a really good experience. And then I had my daughter and stayed home for a long time. And then my husband and I started and run a company right now. So
Awesome.
Yep.
Very cool. Jeff?
First job, or first thing I got paid to do kind of thing was mowing yards. A couple of ladies lived down the street from my grandmother, and whether they needed the yard mowed or not, they paid me $10 to come over to their house every couple of Saturdays. First actual job where I actually had to file a W whatever. I worked at a resort, which basically what that means is that's where that's where like RVs park when they're coming through town, that sort of thing.
Nice.
So I got to clean the pool, I got to build RV spots, and just do a lot of manual labor. But I got to drive a golf cart at 14 years old all over the place. That was
fun.
fantastic. The hardest job I've ever done kind of connects to one of your 10-year phases there. I was a trash man for a day.
There you go.
A day.
That's a good job.
It was a temp job, and this is back in the days. You're too young to probably remember this, Joey. You're not. I'm not going to comment.
wise man.
But guys used to have to ride on the backs of trucks, right? And jump off and grab the kids.
Come on,
I don't know what they did in Maryland, man. I have no idea. So I did that for a day, And man, I showed up.
That's hard work.
Yeah, dude, I was like 18, 19 years old, best shape of my life by far. And I couldn't keep up with the little 5'3" guy who was smoking nonstop the whole day, never broke a sweat, man. They're leaving me, coming back around. That was the hardest day's work I've ever put in, man. But and I've had
people, just take it for granted that their trash disappears.
Yeah,
but
those guys make good money though.
They do.
They make good money.
I was about to say they earn it too.
Yeah, they definitely earn it. But
I got a job at Outback Steakhouse, and this was when, I don't know, again, what it was like
all the
down
bloomin' onions
here.
you could eat.
Yes, bloomin' onions, 2,000 plus calories in one of those things. And the cheese fries, I think, are 2,500 calories, and I could just pack all that away. Anyway, so.
Good old days.
Yeah, but Outback Steakhouse, it was a kind of a growing town where I grew up, and this came to town. It was like one of the only big name restaurants, and so it was packed 2.5-hour waits constantly on Friday nights. And so I was there for 3 years, and I learned a lot. I'm like an Outback kind of snob still. I'm an Outback apologist, the Outback way. And so when I go to any other restaurant, I'm judging them against the criteria that Outback has set, and I'm constantly, judging.
I bet you were a good waiter, though.
Actually, you know what? I have to admit, I didn't cut it very well as a waiter.
Really?
I tried.
You're such a people person.
Yeah, I don't know.
We're not going
another
there,
for a
are
round
we?
table.
We
yeah.
are not going
We're
there,
not going
clearly.
there. But it is where I kind of for another round table. And so we're gonna need a couch and me laying out and someone doing some counseling with me. But no, I actually it was where I caught the bug for entrepreneurship, for leadership, for that kind of thing, and my boss there made a huge impact in my life, and so kind of what I do today and how I operate today has a lot to do with that. So it's pretty cool.
Any dreams or aspirations of a franchise?
At the time,
Not now.
I'm not opening up an Outback.
Okay.
I don't want to start that rumor. So yeah. Well, let's just talk about what it's like being a Christ follower in the workplace and your all's experience. And I want to hear from all of us, but I kind of want to hear from you too. So, Lorri, you go first. Just teacher, education, also with your business now. What's it like?
I think as a teacher, you wore so many hats, kind of like I alluded to earlier. My principal was my boss. My department head was my boss. The kids' parents were kind of my boss.
At least I think they were.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and really, you needed to be
Sure.
thoughtful and thinking of those things. The state legislature was my boss. Like, there were so many different things.
Yeah.
We used to joke all the time that teacher was the only job where you started that job before you knew what your salary was going to be for that year, because the state legislature doesn't approve those things until after you've started school, just by the way things go. So there were a lot of different things to think about, but the main thing you were thinking about is, I need to be a good example as a boss for these kids. I taught 11th and 12th grade, and they were about to go into the workforce. They were needing to learn how to be kind in positions of authority, but firm. And so there were all sorts of things to think about. And, we talk about our core values a lot and how the core values come into the workplace. I'll tell you what, when you're teaching a room of 17 and 18-year-olds, you become prayer dependent really fast.
Yeah.
And we're laughing about that, but it really is true. I think in the job that I have now, which is running a company with my husband, I think I'm so grateful that prayer dependency was a part of who I was as a teacher, because now it seems natural to consult the Lord on something, even if it has to do with finance. So it's to me, teaching is really unique in that you are a servant, but you're also the boss, and so there's that whole thing to think about and to bring in.
Yeah, that's good. That's good, Larry. How about you? And maybe even as you share what it was like, I would love to hear just like a real life example of something you were presented with that, like, choosing the way of the world, or what we would think typically of the world versus being a Christ follower. Yeah.
Yeah. I did try to live out my career. I became a Christian, when I was in 7th grade. So I tried to live out my business career feeling as if I was a representative of Jesus Christ in the workplace. And I'm not going to tell you I always got it right. Yeah. There were plenty of times when I absolutely was not a good representative. But I did try to live my life that way. And I can't think of a time where I actually felt like persecuted, particularly like you see today in our culture in different countries, perhaps. and even places in the Bible. I didn't feel that type of persecution, but I certainly felt challenged at times where maybe people where, it was clear what the right thing to do was, but there might have been an easier path or a shortcut that could be taken, and I would be challenged, from time to time by people maybe wanting to take that easier path. I grew up, my dad just drilled it into my brain about integrity and how, once you get a chink in your integrity, you can't ever get that back. And I also think about, Colossians 3:23 that says, basically, and I'm paraphrasing, but every job that we have, do it as if you're working for the Lord, not for men. And so trying to be that representative and making the right decisions as if, I'm working for God as my boss and not men. The example I would give is one time, and I'm going to be sort of vague with the names, and you'll see why here in a minute. But we were bidding on a very large contract, and I'll just say for a government authority, okay? And it was a big, big contract, multi-year, long-term, big contract. And we happened to, the person who was leading the charge for the company for this contract got a call from the head government official and basically was told, hey, we love your company and we can assure that you'll get this award of this contract if you'll just hire my brother as an employee. And so this person called me and said, hey, I got great news. We can be assured of winning this contract. All we got to do is hire this government official's brother. And I said, well, we're not going to do that. That's not how we do business.
Right.
And, I want you to call him back immediately and tell him there's no way that we're going to award that we're going to hire his brother.
Yeah.
Right.
We do business fairly. We have good service, and we do it honestly, and we do it by the rules, and that's how we operate.
Yeah.
When it occurs to me when he was talking about that you had to have had that decision formed already in your being ahead of time, because I can see myself going down the path of, well, but then I'll be able to hire more people, and I can try. Yeah. Yes, I can see myself going down that path, and so it says something that, as the boss, as a employer, you already had set in your mind, I'm an ambassador of Christ.
Yeah. Right. And how much do we listen? I want to pick up on that, because how much do we just justify in our minds with all kinds of scenarios and situations where we're just like, well, it's not that bad.
Right.
Or, and it might be a gray area.
And hey, we can hire this person. It doesn't have anything to do with this contract. And it does, because that's how it was presented to us.
That's right.
Right.
And anyway, long story short, he called the guy back and said, we're not going to hire your brother, and we've turned in a good bid, and we hope that you'll look at all the bids on an equal basis and fairly. Yeah. And I told the guy, I said, by the way, he told me, you're being naive. You don't understand how these big contracts are done. Yeah. And I said, that may be how they're done in some places, but if we lose the contract because of that, I'm not worried about it, because this will come out eventually. Right. I can assure you. Corruption can't hide very long.
Right.
And as it turns out, the way this thing actually played out, no surprise, we didn't get the contract after the guy called the government official. But a few months later, we got called by a federal prosecutor, and we were informed that they were going after the company that won it. They must have taken the bait. Wow. And he also told us that they had tapped the government official's phone and heard our conversations with this government official. So they said, we were so delighted to see your company did the right thing. And this government official had done this with a lot of other contracts. So that's why they were
tracking it.
They were already on top of it. And the good news is we were awarded the contract after all.
Yeah.
So,
but you know what I love about that story? Yeah.
It all worked out great.
Right.
What I love about that too is you didn't know about the tapping of the phone and whatnot, and you did what was right. And like, I wonder if we all like operated. I mean, not necessarily with the threat that our phones are being tapped, but like if we just out of the posture, the decision that was already made.
Right.
And so, speaking of which, I guess what do you think? We have these core values we've gone over the first 3 episodes of the season. What do we feel like the most difficult core value? And it might be different per situation, per whatever context. But what have you found to be one of the hardest core values in the workplace?
Well, I'll tell you mine, but then I want to hear what y'all's are, because it seems like it'd be really interesting to find out what the hardest core value as a minister is to apply.
Yes.
But anyway, I think for me,
Look at that, we're out of time.
That may happen.
for me, the hardest one to apply is being led by God's word. I know that sounds strange, but I think when we get in work mode, sometimes we get out of being Christ-centered mode. And we shouldn't. It should be a part of who we are. But if I'm not led by God's word in my personal time, it's not going to seep in to my work time.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to see those two things as connected. And so I really want to encourage all of us just to see work as a natural extension of who you are as a Christ follower. I mean, yes, I think it's important that we talk about them in little buckets like this, a Christ follower and in the workplace. But I mean, it's not like we leave them at home when we go to work. And so that might just be a mindset change that we can allow as we go to work tomorrow.
Yeah, that's good. What's it like working in a church?
It's like working in church. Well, as far as the the core values, I think the prayer dependent one is because there's that I mean, it's a reality, but it's a lie we kind of use as an excuse, or it's an excuse we use is probably a better way to say it. It's just that Sunday's always coming, meaning everything's urgent, everything's always like right here. You have to deal with it. You have to decide because Sunday's coming, and you just stop and you convince yourself, well, I'm working in the ministry, therefore the Holy Spirit's in control, and God, which is all true, all true. But God has called us to do certain things as we work as unto Him and not as unto man, right? And so I think it's easy for me, at least speaking for myself, to just to kind of push that to the side and just keep going sometimes instead of just stopping to say, God, what do you want? You know? What about you?
No, I think I would say the same thing. I think we love our whiteboards and we love planning and we love getting in a room and just, coming up with the best possible plan. And we do it in the vein of, well, yeah, of course, like we prayed about it. Like we went to school.
I prayed without ceasing, for goodness sake.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. It's interesting, though, like the idea of working in a church. And I think this really will apply to people in the workplace as well as Christ followers. As we navigate it, I had to really come to terms with as I was had an issue with a previous boss. A mentor of mine really helped me process 3 pillars, and in order to discern my angst or my frustration. And so, as I was a employee of my boss, and the first one was philosophical, the second one was moral, and the third one was theological. Is my issue a philosophical one? Do I just disagree with his methods? Or is it moral? And this one's a little bit more serious. Like, is there something he's doing that is explicitly immoral? Then we have a whole nother issue we have to discuss. Or is it theological? And is it theological then leading to immoral or damaging? And so when I was able to kind of put it in those buckets, I was able to understand really, you know what, it's just philosophical. But yet my philosophy is so connected to my heart that I was making it this big deal where it was at the capacity, I was blowing it up to it being immoral or theological. And I would say 95% of the time, it's really philosophical, but we just personalize it so much, and we feel
tone into stuff.
Oh yeah, and we kind of I don't know. Those are hopefully and maybe theological less in the workplace, but philosophical and moral. You just have to. And if it is just philosophical, you either figure out if you can go with it and ride with it, and if not, then you need to maybe
because there are some things that are going to be connected to your theology or different things.
Sure,
so it all works together. One thing, I mean, this is kind of the dirty underbelly of a church is.
I'm scared now.
Oh, I know, right? Well, no, just the idea that I heard a guy say this years and years ago. It's like we're not in it for the money, but without the money, we're not in it. Yeah, and that's the truth. It's like the church has lights to keep on and people to pay and that kind of stuff. And we all know of churches who been in a situation like yourself, but it's with a big donor or something like that. And like you said, if the pastor or whoever's in that meeting hasn't already decided that, the integrity of the church is worth more than that person's name on the end of a pew, like in the church we grew up in, or on the side of a building, something like that, we will err and get off into the weeds on that stuff.
That's
and
a good
money
point.
is such a big, dangerous motivator, but it's a reality. I mean, we have to deal with it, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know if we're looking at our values, if the generous piece or the led by God's word piece, or which one of those hits that one upside the head the most. But that's the one where I think churches in general, that's one of the dangers of working at church, to answer your question.
Well, it's interesting. Our very first core values being Christ-centered. And it seems crazy to think about that a church could get off course from being Christ-centered, but that's a great example of how that can happen just functionally.
Yeah, for sure. Larry, how about you in terms of those core values and what you found to be difficult?
Yeah, I would say just generally for most people, probably the core value of being outward focused, sharing the gospel with others at work. Yeah. Just given our culture being one of leave your God at home or in the car. When you come into work, leave God in the car. Don't bring God into the workplace. And, what I found is, so how do I apply that? And what I found is what worked for me in the workplace was just getting to know people, having empathy towards others, and getting to know people at all levels of the company on a very personal basis, not just talking about sports or what's on the news, that type of thing, but getting to know them, their family, their interests. So much so that then if they came to work one day and they were really down about something, that you could pick up on it and then ask them, hey, everything okay? What's going on? You want to talk about it? And then asking them if I could pray with them. Right. And yes, you can pray at work. I know that's shocking for many people to hear. But, I would say never make someone feel uncomfortable. Right. But I would also tell you, I never had anybody refuse that offer. And it's amazing to me as I look back over my career, how many times that then led to further discussion, maybe the next day, the next week, maybe months later. They would ask me, hey, there's something different about you. There's this peace that you seem to have, even when there's adversity going on. Where do you get that from? There's my opportunity that God's just given me, to share my own story in the way Jesus has worked in my own life. Yeah. And, I hate to think how many times I let those opportunities pass by. I think we're all given opportunities to do that probably every week. And we're too busy or inconvenienced or whatever. And I'm talking about myself. I probably let too many of those opportunities go by. But when I look back over my career, there were many, many opportunities that I did recognize when they came. Yeah. And it just feels so awesome to know God used me as an instrument.
Yeah. Your answer there,
life.
Your answer there made me want to kind of alter my next question, because the question was going to be what kind of safeguards that you put in place in your heart, mind, and for your eyes and whatnot in the workplace. But I think your illustration there, I want to also ask, so you can answer that question, all of us, and also answer, what are some proactive tips that you would give to someone for their hearts and minds as Christ followers in the workplace to redeem the workplace, to show empathy, to build relationship, to capture those opportunities and whatnot? So safeguards and or proactive tips for the Christ followers.
Observation about having made that decision before you're in the situation. We still have to unpack, how did you even get to the point to make that decision? I mean, that's still a whole conversation. But that's so thing. I mean, once you're there, if you haven't already decided, it's too late for most people at that point.
I think for me, we've discussed on previous episodes that I'm pretty much an introvert, and so if I'm going to be out there doing stuff with people, I want it to have a kingdom impact, because that's a sacrifice for me. And so I tried to, I would ask God, make this day worth it. When my feet hit the ground in the morning, I would ask God, put someone in my path today that I can make a difference. And not ever knowing necessarily what that was going to look like. Was that going to be a 16-year-old kid, or was that going to be, a teacher down the hall, or whatever it was? Yeah. But that mindset, I think, is really important. And I think we lose, Paul did talk about us being ambassadors for Christ. And we kind of lose that, I think, in our society, because what does that even mean? We don't use that word. But, when the gospel was growing and spreading, it's not like they were reading about it in a newspaper or seeing it on TV. What they saw were the people who were acting like Christ. Yeah. And I still think, even though we have different media, I still think we're the primary representatives. And if the majority of what we do during the day is go to work, then I think it's really important that when our feet hit the ground, how am I going to be an ambassador today? I used to get people who would come in my classroom during my conference period and say, I don't really believe in God stuff and prayer stuff, but I know you do. And so this is what's going on with my husband. Would you pray about it when you pray?
Yeah.
And so, and that didn't always lead to huge conversion stories, but I think to Larry's point, if you just are open about that, people will come with their fear and their doubt.
And I think that's the overflow of that Christ-centered life. Just being Christ-centered. It's like Paul in Philippians 1. It's like, he sees his circumstances, he sees people, he sees himself through the lens of how does this affect the gospel? How does this help the gospel? As long as the gospel's going forward, he was okay with the circumstances, okay with what others were doing, and
that's
okay
a great point.
With whatever was true about himself and that kind of thing. But, you have to have that centeredness when you're put in a situation that, if I say no to this, what are the implications? Right. If the implications are more important than God's glory, we've already lost.
Yeah, and I think you guys have already said it, but the identity, it's an identity piece. It was so much as we say, I am my job.
I think the business, the workplace, is the largest untapped mission field that exists.
I would agree.
And I think if you ask most people, most Christians, they think that what we're talking about, that's the job of the pastor. Yeah. That's not my job. Right. That's for the pastor to do. I've gone back and looked at Matthew 28, 19, and 20, and it doesn't say pastors make disciples. It says for all of us to be doing that. That's what we're, otherwise, why aren't we just zapped up to heaven as soon as we become believers? He's left us here for a reason. And I think we have many opportunities. We don't have to make people feel uncomfortable. We don't have to walk up and down the halls of our workplace, chanting scripture.
Right.
But there's very simple things that God puts these opportunities in front of us each day, and all you got to do is just tell your story and how your life has changed with Jesus since you've become a believer. It's very simple.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, it's been a really good conversation, and I'm really grateful. We probably have 10, 15 more questions we could talk about and dissect, but we're so grateful for you, Larry, for being a partner at Austin Ridge and engaging in ministry and coming on the roundtable. So thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Equip Podcast. If you have a question for us or feedback on the show, you can connect with us at equip@austinridge.org. And finally, don't forget to share and subscribe. See you next time.